Welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar focused on the business Work for Good, a platform that enables businesses and charities to collaborate, particularly through cause marketing. I'll explain a tiny little bit more about that. Before I do that, just to explain your host today. So my name is Duncan Parker. I run a business called Ethical Good. We have been asked by Neil, the owner of Work for Good, to just give some consultancy on the future of Work for Good, and this webinar is part of that. Our background at Ethical Good, 14 years ago, we kind of were very early adopters of cause marketing, and we acted as an agency that enabled businesses to connect with charities and to, through the sale of their products and services, support charities through cause marketing. And one of the reasons I've been very excited about Work for Good is because I think they really filled a gap in the market where we were operating at one end of the market where charities were connecting with businesses. They were often ones that didn't get off the ground purely due to the size of them, and for charities saying it's not really worth the candle for us, and equally on the other side, businesses saying this is quite hard work, connecting with a charity. They're asking a lot of us. How does this work? And that we really saw the gap for SMEs, particularly startup businesses, connecting with charities, wanting to do good, wanting to give back, but actually finding that it was a bit harder, a bit more complicated than they originally thought. And that's where Work for Good came in and really, I think, came up with a great idea. Before I move on, we have with us Neil Mehta, who is the owner of Work for Good and Givey. I'll introduce Neil properly in a little while, and also my colleague at Ethical Good, Zara, who has been supporting Neil over the past few months, look at the best way forward for Work for Good. What we're going to do this afternoon, just over the next 45 minutes to an hour, depending on people's timings, is we're just going to present a little bit of the way forward as we see it. We put quite a lot of research and quite a lot of thought and time into figuring out the best way for Work for Good to operate. We want to share that with you, and we want your honest feedback. If you think the baby is ugly, we want you to tell us the baby's ugly. We're looking for a real open, transparent conversation, not least so that we understand, those of you on the call, and mainly from charities, how it works for you and what would be the best way forward. So as I said in my intro, I got excited about Work for Good because it was doing something in a gap that we could see. We could make really large opportunities work between people like Unilever and UNICEF. That those kind of deals were quite easy to make happen because there was visibility of income for the charity, and the charity was happy to release their brand to that. Whereas in the SME sector is a little bit more risky, a little bit more entrepreneurial, and therefore that's where Work for Good came up with a solution. I got to know the team at Work for Good, and really liked their idea, really liked what they were hoping to do, but probably with one large but and of nervousness. Their model wasn't as technology based as I hoped it would be, and that was for good reason. They needed to raise more money, and they adopted a private equity approach. So the idea was that they would receive investment from, I suppose, investors and philanthropic investors alike, and in order to grow the business technology-wise and staff-wise to a point where it reached critical mass and therefore could survive on its own 2 feet from essentially a 5% fee on the fundraising that they enabled. Unfortunately, they didn't get there, and some of the promised funding that they thought was coming their way didn't materialize, and approximately 6 months ago they had to kind of call it a day. And at that point, Neil from Givey was able to step in and buy the business, but particularly to focus on how do we make this work from both an efficiency point of view, technology being the operative word, and secondly, is there a different way of business modeling this? Now, our view is that the opportunity is huge. I don't know if you saw in the third sector last week, that they reported that UK retailers raised more than 500 million for good causes last year. That's, part of the market that we're aiming at, but actually it goes beyond retailers into the service industry, into accountancy firms and solicitors and lawyers and SMEs and lots of different opportunities where increasingly businesses are looking to do good in the world to achieve their ESG aspirations. And part of that is connecting either in a hyper-local way to good causes and charities and communities around them, or to leverage some of the brands that are out there of people that are already doing good. And we already met Ross and some of the team from Alzheimer's. Those kind of causes that are very much in the public mindset of wanting to help and support, either because the business thinks it's the right thing to do and it's a nice thing to do, or because they want to present themselves as good people to their partners, suppliers, clients, etc. So we're very enthusiastic about the opportunity. We've received incredibly good feedback from both the 4,000 SMEs that use the platform and the 1,000 or so charities that use the platform, that this is still a needed business. So today's call really is to focus on a little bit to tell you where we are and to bring you up to speed, and to test the new business model against you, just to see what you think and for that honest feedback. So without further ado, I hope that's a decent kind of introduction to what our call's about and what we're thinking. I'm going to introduce you to Neil. Neil is the sole owner of Givey, a small charities fundraising platform that now has also bought Work for Good and is looking to make that work. A personal bit of feedback on Neil. Neil is doing both of these things because he wants to give back to the world. Neil is a very successful technologist. I've known him for about 10 years now, and is often described by me when I'm introducing to people as one of the nicest people I know, and I mean that with all sincerity. He is looking to do the right thing through Givey and Work for Good. He's looking to do the right thing in life in general. He's a hugely talented technologist and digital solutions person. And so I'm going to hand over to him to guide you through the next couple of moments. Thanks, Neil.
Blimey, thanks, Duncan. Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for a lot of you on the call today that have, for the last 3 months, I've personally talked to one-to-one to really understand the marketplace where commercial participation agreements are playing a part in giving. Bit of background, I have been a trustee and chair and still am of charities, so I do really understand at the grassroots what that is like, and I've been a fundraiser as well for the last 20 years. So that's kind of the backdrop of how technology, I see, can help to really get donations at the lowest cost of distribution. So I think that was the kind of direction of travel. So Givey is a digital platform that's focused towards small charities and local communities in the UK, and we had our uplift through the lockdown, actually, that we really came into our own when local charities and volunteer-led organizations use the platform extensively, and we don't actually on that side raise funds for the bigger charities on that side, but we've raised about £4 million from about 5,000 small charities or whatever, and just to kind of demonstrate the use of technology, we went through a very similar phase that potentially we might be going through Work for Good, that we are processing that through the platform with 2.5 people and volunteers. So we are literally practically run like a small charity, a local social enterprise, and it's highly effective using volunteers, career break women, interns, and so forth. So I see the model that potentially we can make work in Work for Good. as well, looking down the line. And the synergy of Work for Good is that it's the opposite side of the coin, basically. So we have about 100,000 individual donors, increasing weekly, monthly on the Givey side, been voted by Charity Digital as the most money going to charities for the last 4 years. So it's kind of taken time, but that's established a way of working that works. And then Work for Good. Work for Good is obviously the other side, which is businesses helping to do through sales, donations to charities. And the attraction for Work for Good, from my point of view, was that there was a mission to look at small businesses in particular, which is kind of underrepresented in how they can donate to charities, and that's big charities as well as small charities, but they need to do it in a very easy manner and in a manner that is not huge, because most small businesses, just like small charities or whatever, are very time poor and are very cost conscious and whatever. So I think when I looked at it, Work for Good, I looked at that, obviously, just like small charities represent, from a quantity point of view, the biggest amount of volunteers and charities are in that bottom 10% or whatever. Similarly, I think I looked at the small businesses, and that's about 2 trillion contribution to UK PLC. And if you think about it, if it's just 1 in 20 businesses, we managed to convert 1% of it to go to charities, we would actually increase the pool of donations, actually, which is one thing that is stagnant, basically. And yes, we get all the money from trust foundations and big charity, big businesses and so forth. So I thought that that's kind of a big contribution that would help or whatever. So so hence we've got Work for Good. The challenge is actually to transfer some of that into a digital way, so that we have a scenario of the lowest cost of distribution. So kind of talking bluntly or whatever, but if you raise £1 million on Work for Good and they make £50,000 a year on 5%, that's just not going to be viable when you've got a workforce of at least 10 people full-time working or whatever. So that was the nub of Work for Good, that I saw that what they're doing is really good, but it's going to take a bit of time to find out what it is that is optimal. So that kind of, that's kind of the background to Work for Good. Some of the good things, which are very, very positive, and they have continued to be so, even though for the last few months or whatever, we're going through some integration technology issues, and some of the charities here know that some of these things we've done manually, etc. But what hasn't changed is how efficient what Work for Good do is, basically. And this is just a quick summary of why it works, basically, because it takes out a lot of pain in how this goes about doing the donation flow. It's raised and is continuing to raise in the last quarter, that since we've taken over, it's raised processed over $250,000 in the last 3.5 months to the charities that are on this call and more. There's 4,500, as Duncan mentioned. We've got 4,500 registered businesses, and we continue to, that automatically happens, that they can decide which charities they want to donate to and so forth. And at any point in time, we've got probably about 600 odd active CPAs that are kind of just being processed month in, month out towards the charities or whatever. And the charities fall into roughly two kind of buckets, if you will, best way of describing. One is I call them small charities, and the other ones are obviously the well-known charities such as Alzheimer's and Mind, Trussell Trust, etc., which are still going through the platform in terms of raising donations. One of the things that I realized is obviously some of the bigger charities, having talked to them, are very much seeing Work for Good as a good channel, an efficient channel for donations, which are probably anything under 25, some of them under 50K. They want to use Work for Good more and more, because that is much more of an efficient way to engage smaller businesses who want to donate low amounts of money, etc., or whatever. So and obviously the whole point of digital is that it makes it easier and also legally compliant. Sorry, Zara, that's that. One of the things that we've looked at is that actually on the current 5% model or whatever, it wouldn't be viable to continue to do that unless we raise loads of money, like a software business. And then, to be honest with you, ultimately the charities pay for that kind of business model. And one of the things we considered also is actually whether you charge a higher percentage of the donation that's raised or whatever. And I think that probably is not a practical thing either. Basically, like one of the bigger charities have something like 600 CPAs, which are under 15K that they process or whatever. Now it's once you start doing that's a serious amount of money, and whole raison d'etre of what we are trying to build is maximum money going to the charities. And obviously at the same time we are sustainable, basically, with the lowest cost of distribution. So the proposal is that some of the costings that have been done, just to reiterate that I've talked to charities, some of the charities are saying the average cost of a CPA, when you take into account internal resources, costs, legal fees, etc., whatever, is roughly 550 odd pounds per CPA and so forth, or whatever. That currently is obviously any CPAs that comes through is free. And last year's average kind of donation, if you're across the board, for each CPA was about just over £1,100, basically. So these are kind of the data points that I've been looking at to kind of say how do we navigate in between this, so that actually we can fulfill, because we Work for Good, one extra thing they have compared to any kind of normal crowdfunding kind of platform, donations platform, is that there is costs associated with managing businesses and charities and legals and so forth, and where we have to incur those costs because we're incorporating that within the service that we provide. And the positive thing from personal perspective is talking to some of the bigger charities or whatever have said that we are unique and we are enabling more donations to come into the funnel, and that is good to hear. And our survey that Zara and we did is exactly that fact of that point. So the proposal is there in terms of how we see maybe to kind of look at some kind of membership fee that we can introduce in the new year, and hence today's call and a number of other discussions that I'm having with some of the bigger charities as well, who are very, very open on this, because they believe that this is something that they would support, which was the reason for putting this together today.